I work for a murder cleanup company. No, not crime scene cleanup, murder cleanup. My company comes in after a call and clean the scene before it becomes a crime scene. If there's ever been a murder reported or a missing person report, but there's no leads, no evidence, not even a body, yeah, that's us. The company was made official at the end of the 1800s after Jack the Ripper killed his seventh victim. But there's only 5, I can hear you saying, to which I'll reply, only 5 found. We're good at our job, at hiding and disposing bodies, removing any physical evidence such as blood, hair, fingerprints, murder weapon, and cleaning up the area to its previous untainted state of pristine. It was as if nothing had ever happened. A doe would feel comfortable giving birth after our cleanups. I've seen quite a few different types of murders that people could only see in movies or on TV. People smothered by pillows, clothes, a teddy bear. People stabbed with knives, a hat pin, a fire poker. I once saw a person stabbed with a butter knife in their ribs. The amount of force a person has to put behind a butter knife to penetrate skin and lodge itself between ribs, I may never want to know. Now, I'm sure you're wondering with how dangerous this job could become, what with tampering with a crime scene, not reporting a crime, accomplice to a murder, how good is the pay? Well, the answer to that could only be one thing. If I die tomorrow, there will be fights over my estate. That is, if they found out I was dead. Minor clause in my contract, no big deal. I've worked at this job for a little over a year, and if it didn't raise any red flags, I could possibly purchase a 4-bedroom home with cash. But since this job isn't technically legal, I can't make any extravagant purchases with my fat stacks, or put it in a bank since I'm unemployed. Hell, my parents think I'm selling drugs or prostituting or something. Now, enough about how amazing or difficult my career is. You didn't come for that story. You came for the story about the most unbelievable, incomprehensive, and downright horrendous murder scene that I have witnessed to date. And it didn't even involve women or children. Just a single man and a single knife, I think. Let me paint you a picture. You're sitting in what can only be described as a break room with who can only be described as your coworkers, drinking what can only be described as coffee. You don't know his name. You don't need to. Names lead to companionship, and if you make friends with these coworkers, you feel bad when they leave, or leave. You're sipping your 3rd cup of coffee, hoping that dark ambrosia will give you the strength needed to get through the rest of your shift. Your newest coworker, a kid maybe 19, looks like he just walked in on his parents making a little brother, a horror on his face that you know will fade in a few calls. I didn't think a senator's murder/suicide would be that harrowing, I thought, but remembered, I was a new kid once too. I almost threw up at the scene of a Holocaust recreation in Kansas. I still shudder at the image of a 4-year-old with their skin sloughing off from the chemical shower. Look at it this way, I said, trying to calm him down. At least the kid looked legal. He just looked at me with a look of, "What is wrong with you?" on his face, before staring back down at his feet, probably trying to get the sound of sloshing blood out of his head. The door swung open for our boss, a slightly overweight man with balding gray hair and a face to rival any drill sergeant. He looked at us with a straight face and said, "Panties up, ladies. You got a call." "We literally just got back," I replied, a twinge of whining in my voice. "I just poured some coffee." "Do I look like I'm paying you to sit on your ass and make yourself pretty, soft man?" he replied, knowing full well how long we've been back. He threw a wadded ball of paper at me, probably the info we'll need. "Panties up," he shouted, and slammed the door behind him. I swear, that door had been replaced at least 6 times after I came in. Not sure if that was a coincidence or just how he was, but I try not to dwell on the structure of the building. If it came down, it wouldn't be my fault. Well, I sighed, standing slowly and downing the burning liquid of life and normalcy. Let's get going, new guy. The sooner we get this done, the sooner we can get another call. Isn't there another job I can do here? He asked, a hint of fear in his voice. Like making coffee or cleaning the break room? I looked around the clean, empty break room and asked, What's to clean? There were literally only 3 tables and a handful of chairs, one table holding a new-looking coffee maker that's been here longer than I have. Well, what about paperwork? He asked, grasping at straws while he followed me to the van. Place like this must have plenty of paperwork. That's the boss's job, I replied flatly. I opened the door for him and gestured inside. Come on, kid. In and out, 2 hours max. 2? He gasped, buckling in. Well, it's a single body in a basement with a stab wound. Even if they hit a major artery, it'll probably take us just under 2 hours. I closed the door, climbed in the driver's seat, and drove to the designated address. Our details were usually 3 simple points: number of bodies, weapon of choice or wound type, destination. Our mantra for this job has always been, the less we know, the better. The drive was silent. The kid was probably questioning his life choices. When we pulled up to a dilapidated, boarded-up house with the front door removed and leaning against the patio railing. Drug deal gone wrong, I guessed, opening my door. I'm putting $20. You? It had always been tradition to put up fake bets on what you thought happened, based on what little information we had and the looks of the destination. What? He asked, staring at the haunted house reject with his mouth agape. Oh, ghost hunting. Ghost hunting? I opened the side door and pulled out 2 painter's smocks. Yeah, like 2 kids try ghost hunting, one friend spooks the other and they stab their friend to death? He took one smock and zipped it on, making sure to tuck any loose hairs back in the hood. We donned our protective equipment, shoe booties, gloves, goggles, and headlamps to avoid leaving anything of ourselves behind. And who's paying the hefty price tag for us to come out and hide this? I grabbed a gurney with a caddy of cleaning supplies on it and started rolling it toward the door. Well, in that case, he lifted one end as we carried it up the front steps. Who's paying to cover up the drug deal? Smart kid, I thought, and looked at the door, contemplating how to put the door back in the doorway without making new drill holes. All right, point made. Drug deal or ghost hunting gone wrong. You're on, kid. We wheeled the gurney into the room and left it in the foyer, searching the first and second floor for any stragglers or squatters. Cleaning up the murders is easy. Getting rid of witnesses is a pain in the ass. As soon as the room was cleared, we descended the stairs to the basement, leaving the gurney at the top of the steps and carrying down a body bag and the cleaning supplies. The shine of 2 headlamps illuminated our way into the darkness, but the lower down we went, the more both of our speculations seemed less and less likely. Bloody prints on the steps, walls, and railing led our way down, but the prints were not going up the stairwell like there were people leaving. They were trailing back down, like someone was pulling them back. The basement floor was covered in almost an inch of blood pooled from wall to wall. This didn't come from one person, I thought, looking down the empty room and saw necklaces hanging on the wall behind a brace beam with a body tied to it in the center of the basement. At first glance, the body was facing away from the stairway, tied with their arms up in a Y shape and ankles tied together. We walked further into the room, both beams lighting up certain areas of the body's back as we looked over the corpse. We glanced at each other in silence out of respect for the deceased, communicating with our eyes. Guess we were both wrong. I walked around the corpse slowly, surveying the damage. Legs were still intact, no wounds, just some strange markings written in blood. The lower half of the body was nude, displaying the corpse was male, although his equipment was missing. His abdomen was chiseled. Guy obviously was a gym member, but his chest was where the obvious cause of death lay. His chest was flayed open, rags of skin hanging loosely from muscle and bone, and the ribs were all broken outward, like they broke his ribs and opened them to remove whatever was inside. There was an incision-like cut in the skin above and below the wound, starting just over his navel and ending at his clavicle. His face was frozen in a horrified look of pain and terror, his eyes staring down at the exposed tissue below him. On his face, aside from the expression, was more of the bloody markings, unknown symbols drawn methodically along his cheeks, nose, and forehead, the blood dried and dark, bits of it flaking off. He was alive when this happened to him, I thought somberly. He was alive long enough for this blood to dry on him. How long could something like this take? I heard a coughing behind me and turned quickly to see the kid covering his nose with one hand and pointing down at a mass in the corner. A pile of, I'd guess, 6 or 7 bodies lay in a pile of blood, guts, and viscera, no definitive characteristics to each body, aside from different colored flesh clinging to muscle and bone. I set the cleaning caddy down on the shallowest pool of blood I could find and handed the kid a medium-sized garbage bag. "Anything of value goes in here," I said coldly. Anything that could be traced back to a victim or suspect was sold to a pawn shop the boss owned. Extra money and less evidence. "But," he started and choked back bile. "The boss said 1 body." "People lie, kid. Start collecting, and keep an eye out for any murder weapons. No way this was done with just their bare hands and a knife." I looked around the body and found a single dagger gleaming in the light of my headlamp, the only thing that wasn't covered in dark blood. I gingerly lifted it out of the liquid and examined it closely. The same markings on our corpse were etched into the foot-long silver blade. The handle, about 4 inches long, held 8 rubies and 2 diamonds. The rubies looked dark as the blood around me, and if I stared hard enough, the colors seemed to swirl inside, like a liquid being stirred in a pot. I held the dagger gently and raised it slowly to cut the binds on the body's wrists, freeing it from the beam and slowly laying it in the body bag, careful not to cut myself on the exposed bones. The kid started gagging, the sound of squelching coming from his hands digging into the bloody pile for wallets, watches, jewelry, or anything else we could hawk. I turned back after zipping the bag shut and saw him holding a handful of necklaces with matching pendants. "Hold on," I called, reaching for one of the necklaces. I took one from his hand and let him drop the rest in the bag. The pendant had a single symbol carved into a piece of polished wood, one large spot carved in the center, with 8 smaller, darker spots spiraling out from the center. A crack in the pendant broke a 9th spot, possibly meaning a loss. I looked down and counted the pendants in the bag. 6, and the one I was holding was 7. I looked back at the body bag, the 8th occupant of this weird ritual. Or was he the sacrifice for this ritual? I pocketed the necklace, turned back to the cleaning caddy, and removed a large plastic garbage bag. Now it was time for my ritual, cleaning this up so it looked like it never happened. We bagged up and collected the mess of dead bodies into garbage bags and set them at the bottom of the stairs. We only had 1 body bag, and this mess would make it more difficult to clean up those bags. Once the bodies were cleaned up, we started mopping up the copious amounts of blood. Luckily, the floor for this basement was tiled, so it was easy to sop it all up. Unfortunately, that meant we had to go through each crack and loose seal between the tiles and scrub them with a toothbrush to make sure there wasn't even a single cell left. We finished soaking up the blood and I started on any chunks left over while the kid cleaned off the support beam. Sweat is harder to clean than blood, mostly because you can't see it, but I thought I trained him decently enough that I'd make sure he did it right after he was done. Once we got the dried blood symbols off the walls, I noticed claw marks on the walls under the blood, so maybe they were here before the blood was and decided to ignore it. The kid was shaking a burlap bag of dust and dirt around the newly cleaned floor, and I ran over to stop him. "Hey!" I hollered, shaking him from his autopilot mode. "We do that on the way out. We still have to walk on this. Try getting the blood out of the stairwell." He nodded and took a rag to the stairwell, leaving me to clean up the dirt mess. Sighing, I swept the dust into the corners, places it would settle if there was a draft or gather due to the settling foundation. I started filling fresher marks with a plaster concrete mixture and replaced any missing gouges of wood with our own false wood mix, stronger than real wood, fake enough to look real. Gotta love it. Suddenly, the kid started yelling for help, and I heard a squelch, cutting the yell short. I ran over to the stairwell and saw the kid slumped over on the stairwell, blood pooling and dripping down the bottom 3 steps. I turned the kid over and saw the dagger sticking from his eye, plunged through the socket and into his brain. I stared, mouth agape, and felt the bile rise. I stepped back, trying to choke it down, still feeling the warmth of his fresh body on my hands. Through the glow of my headlamp, I saw the handle of the dagger. There were 9 blood-red rubies. Wait, 9? Screw it, I thought, threw the kid's body over my shoulder and jogged up the steps, pulling the gurney and the 8 occupying bodies out the door. I threw everything in the truck, grabbed a book of matches, and walked back to the top of the basement stairs. One thing our boss emphasized with us was to never smoke at work sites. 1, the butts and ash showed someone was there, and 2, the cleaning chemicals were extremely flammable. I struck a match, set it in the book, and tossed it down the steps. It landed perfectly on the tiled floor, and the floor quickly was engulfed in flames. Since we're thorough, the walls and support beam would soon go up, so I ran out the building, set the door in the doorway, disregarding setting it properly in the frame, and saw a symbol graffitied on the door. It matched the symbol on the pendant slightly, but looked less clean, more scrawled on with spray paint. I whipped my phone out and took a picture before standing the door in the frame and sped away. Thankfully, our tires are specially made so it looks like, well, no one was there, so no tire tracks. I sped back to the office, almost breaking speed limits but avoiding known speed traps the whole way back. I slammed on the brakes as soon as I made it in the garage and immediately vomited in a nearby trash can. "You okay, bruh?" a coworker asked. He was in charge of cleaning up inside the vans and changing and disposing of tires after every call. "Haven't seen you like this since your first day." "Haven't had to deal with that, even with my first day," I croaked, throwing a finger at the side door of the van. He rolled the door open and shouted, "Madre de Dios!" I didn't even have to look to know he saw the kid's dead body draped over the gurney, dripping blood and feces on the floor. Or maybe it was laying on the floor in a pool of blood and feces. I was driving pretty fast and heard a few things fall and thump down while I was. I heard him call over the intercom for our boss to come down to the garage, while the only female in the company, the one who made the coffee and cleaned the break room, walked me to a nearby sink to rinse my mouth out and wash my face. She stood with me, holding my shaking hands and keeping me close to the trash can in case there was more that came out. While we listened to the boss and the auto guy talk about what they saw, I heard another squelch and my stomach lurched, watching the boss pull the dagger from the kid's eye, the blade still gleaming, clean silver. He walked over to us and held the dagger up, displaying it to me. "Where did you find this?" he asked. Was that fear in his voice? "At the scene," I croaked out, trying not to look at the newest bloody ruby in the handle. How many diamonds did it have when you found it? 2. No, how many diamonds? He emphasized diamonds, enunciating each syllable. 8 rubies, 2 diamonds. I was sounding angrier, but I didn't like being treated like an idiot who couldn't count gems. He looked at the dagger and asked, How many bodies? Including the kid? When you got there. There was 1 on a beam and 6 or 7 in a pile in the corner. He looked back up at me, a look of utter terror on his usually stern face. What happened to the building? When you left, what happened? I burned it down. Something was in there. It attacked the kid, and there were these symbols everywhere. Symbols? His eyes went wide. Like what? I took my phone out and showed him the picture. This was on the door. It was the only one I got a picture of. I also found this. I took the pendant out of my pocket and held it out to him. He stared at the picture and took the pendant, analyzing it methodically. He then ran out of the garage with the pendant and the dagger, yelling over his shoulder, Go home, you'll get a full day's pay. He slammed the door behind him and disappeared from sight. We all watched, looked at the van with the new kid's body, then left the building without a single word between the 3 of us. The next day, the van was gone, along with the bodies from yesterday and any evidence I was at the call site yesterday. It was weird being on the other side of my own job. I ran into my boss and asked him about the van. It's being cleaned, he replied quickly, slipping a pendant back in my hand with a slip of paper and strode quickly to his office. I left for the break room and saw the cleaner and shop guy sitting at a table, each with similar pendants and slips of paper. I sat at the table with them and set my pendant on the table with theirs and read my note. Keep this with you for the next 10 days. No arguments. Do not leave it anywhere. Keep it with you. 10 days. I looked at my coworkers and broke the silence. I think we need to keep these with us for the next 10 days. But why 10? She asked. I looked at the pendants and finally noticed how different they looked from the other ones I found in the basement yesterday. This one was on a white, polished stone and looked more like an eyeball with a black iris and a white constricted pupil and 8 black spots surrounding the black. 8 black spots and 1 white in the center makes 9, and the others had 10 total black spots. The outer 9 looked painted black, spiraling out from a lighter center spot. Ours is not to ask why. He spoke like he said this hundreds of times. Ours is to do what we're told. That's not the saying, she said, grabbing her pendant and walking out suddenly. Around here it is, he muttered, grabbed his pendant and walked out after her, probably both going to their respective duties. I sat in the break room staring at the pendant like I would a cup of coffee, waiting for the boss to come in with my first call of the day. Nothing's changed, right? Right?